Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home. Before I jump in with today's guest, I want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do here, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really, really helps us to make the progress. To find out about our certification courses, online video libraries, books, and other courses, please go to rupertisaacson.com. So now let's jump in. All right, I have Richard Williams. Richard Williams is the publisher of a niche publishing company, which happens to be international, called Xenophon Press, named after the Greek philosopher Xenophon. But it's an equine, largely classical equine publishing company. Why is it named after a Greek philosopher? Because Xenophon, the Greek philosopher Xenophon, was also a master horseman who was not just the pupil of Socrates and the best mate and perhaps a bit rival of Plato, but he also wrote the first European book that we know of on what we would today call dressage. And he was also a military dude and many other things too. So he's an all-round educated bloke from Greece about 3,000 years ago. And Richard Williams, who publishes the Xenophon Press, is publishing the canon of creed of this tradition that those of us who are horse nerds have inherited. And he's keeping it alive. If you think about the Library of Alexandria, the legendary Library of Alexandria before it burned, or think about what's housed in Oxford University or Heidelberg University or Harvard or any of these august institutions that we trust them to kind of keep these canons of human knowledge going, even if we never look at them. That's what Xenophon Press is. But Xenophon Press, of course, is more practical, because we do actually still train our horses from this. As you can imagine, this being a bit of a niche thing, it's not exactly going to make you the kind of money that going off to be an MBA and working for multinationals in Dubai might make you. You have to be passionate about this. It really is, at the end of the day, an act of philosophy, an act of love. So, Richard, I have been reading and working from these books of yours for quite a while now. I think I'm into my second decade of it. And you keep them coming and you keep publishing them. It's not making you a vast amount of money, but you are contributing to Western civilization in a huge way. Why on earth do you do this? How do you do this? How do you kind of make it work? And what can we learn from this? Thank you for coming on the show. Over to you. Why you do this?
Well, thank you for the introduction. Why? It's a couple of reasons. First of all, I really want to learn. And I realize that what I want to learn might not even be widely known by people who are alive today. And, or if they are alive today, I'm not that portable. So I can't necessarily get to, this little village in Portugal or, the hill town in Vienna or outside of Vienna. I can't necessarily travel around.
Hold on a second.
So this loving to learn, I couldn't necessarily transport myself around. And at the time when the opportunity to buy Xenophon Press came up, we were living in a remote area and we had 2 small kids. And when I was a bachelor, I could go to Europe and did go to Europe and travel around the country and take lessons from whomever. And I basically looked at my wife, my lovely wife, Frances, my better half, and said, "Tag, you're it. You're my riding teacher now. And I'm your riding teacher. And that's all we have." And then basically what I realized when this opportunity came up to buy Xenophon Press, it was owned by Ivan Bezikov. He was in his 80s and not really able to continue, and having failing health, and his wife's health was failing, and he couldn't really fulfill the books. He couldn't fulfill orders for books. And I said, look, I don't want any of these books to go out of print, so I don't want to overstep. But if you want help with this, if you want me to ship out your books for you, I would be happy to do that, or anything that made sense to keep what you started here, to keep it alive, let me know. And he said, well, that's good to know. And nobody else had made him that offer. And then within 6 months or a year, he asked me to purchase. So what I realize now in hindsight is that this doing these books, you end up having to read the books when you edit them or translate them and edit them. If somebody else is doing the translation, you end up having to read as a publisher, and I'm the publisher slash editor. Francis is the acquisitions editor. So if I am too close to the book and can't see mistakes or can't see areas that could be improved, then I have Francis look at it. Just could you have and she'll go through the entire book. But I realized what I could do is I could actually time travel. One of the first books that we did with this was Dom Diogo de Braganza's Dressage in the French Tradition. He was a Portuguese master, a friend of Nuno Oliveira's, sometimes riding with Nuno Oliveira. But this guy was, like today, he would probably be, 96 or 100. He passed away a few years ago. But I basically got to meet his equestrian knowledge through translating or helping the translator, refine his translation, reading that book. So I got to meet this guy, and also the distillation of an entire lifetime of equestrian knowledge. And so then I said, well, it's great that I had, a teacher here and a teacher there, one of which is in Vienna, one's in Budapest, one's in California, but I'm not there now. So this is a way to not just I could actually time travel, but also space travel, right? I could travel and glean this information. So that was magical, because I said to myself, well, what if the person that knows the answer to the question that I'm seeking is possibly no longer living? What if they were from a different century? Just because they were in a different century doesn't make them invalid. We all have finite lifetimes. So this is what I really love about it, is because sometimes I feel, I was maybe born in the wrong century. Do you ever have that feeling like you should have been born in the 1930s or,
I'm disabused from that anytime I go to the dentist, and then I'm like, actually, I'm quite happy to be.
that whole new set of, teeth that you got by, just dropping a few thousand is fine.
Yeah.
So there, of course, we get the benefit of the modern convenience of today's world and advances in science, but we also should not be turning our back on these people who basically often lived right next door to, or above, or in an apartment adjacent to the stables. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have TV. They didn't have movies. They didn't have automobiles. If they wanted to go anywhere, they had to saddle up a horse, or they had to get their carriage together with horses and then go somewhere, right, with their horses. So they were spending.
Right, and if the horse failed them, they had a real problem. They might die. Yeah.
Right. But they were spending all of their waking hours horse, right? It was all about the horse. So we don't even have people today that we have very, very few people today who are doing that where they're immersed, completely immersed, not just for like I go for a week-long immersion, but I go for a lifelong immersion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
and I think you put your finger on the word classical, which is that classical means something that endures down the generations and is passed from generation to generation. I got it from grandma, and she got it from her grandma. Why? Because it still functions.
right. And the thing is, like, if we're trying to learn technology that's up to date in 1920, you know what? We're going to be completely out of date because technology has actually changed, and
Mm-hmm.
it's changing, and the rate of change of technology in industry, right,
Mm-hmm.
is always changing. If you're up to speed for the 1920, you know, internet protocols in the thing that's going on there, you're 5 years out of date or 6 years out of date. But the thing that keeps bringing us back to why this knowledge doesn't need to change that much is because the horse as an entity really actually hasn't changed that much.
Mm-hmm.
They still respond in the same ways. They still have the same needs. It's a grazing animal, you know. It's not a piece of machinery that we're like an NVIDIA chip that is going, you know, 1,000 times faster than it did a half a year ago. That's not happening with horses. They are keeping us grounded in that reality. And that is the primary reason why the knowledge that they had in 1729, you can read that and just say, okay, well, maybe we've had advances in shoeing and we know a little bit more about the biochemistry of feeding. But in terms of the way the horse actually responds to us and our training and our seat and our exercises, we must I think we have to avail ourselves of what they knew then, because these people were spending, you know, 12 hours in the barn a day, 365 times the lifetime. So they have way more time in the barn. I mean, you have a lot of time in the barn and around horses, and so do I, but we also have other things that we do. So
Mm-hmm.
we can't even compete with the amount of exposure, the trial and error that these people had. So why, you know, Gustav Steinbrecht is, you know, knows what he's talking about because he basically lived it. He lived
Mm-hmm.
it. And we don't even the experts that we have today, they didn't have this kind of same exposure. Very, very few people. Very
It's an interesting thing. Let's go back to Xenophon himself. You know, your press is named after Xenophon. Xenophon is the ultimate sort of classical example because all we horse people, if we have any sense, read him, and then we read all the people that came after him. But he's not just taught as a horse dude, he's taught at West Point Military Academy or a Sandhurst Military Academy as the master of the tactical retreat for having brought 10,000 Greek mercenaries more or less safely home out of enemy territory from Baghdad to Greece on foot in 300 BC or so, and then 400 BC. And then he is also taught in philosophy schools as the complement to Plato, and perhaps he's the father of Stoic philosophy, and so on and so on. And the point is that there's relevance, so much relevance today, still from people like that, whether they're in military tactics, or whether they're in philosophy, or whether they're in horsemanship, or no matter or science, or no matter what they're in. I agree. To take a modernist approach puts the lie to where modernism, what modernism is, because modernism comes out of the thing that came before modernism, and we think, oh, something's ancient. Well, it wasn't ancient when it was written, and so if it
right.
still works today, then what we're actually talking about is the present moment. And I think when people are putting their mindfulness hats on and that sort of thing, talking about the present moment, what's often forgotten is that the past and the future are also the present moment. There are all these present moments. And I feel that you are making those available. But why the passion for it, and why the passion for this particular type of riding? Why aren't you roping? Why aren't you jumping? Why aren't you riding races? What is it about this, what they call classical riding? What is it that makes it so addictive that you would consign yourself to penury in order to be able to bring out all these books? Why is it so beautiful?
I think it comes down to basically, one or two words. It comes down to truth. It really comes down to, is it true? Is it kind? Is it helpful? You know, it's basically that, so we can come up with ways of tricking horses or signaling horses to paw with their right front leg 7 times as we scratch them on the wither 7 times. We can do cues, but the classical methodology, and that's kind of how I sort what I keep, is like, if it speaks a language, you try it with a horse, and you try it a few different ways. If you try it with a horse and it works, and wait a minute, this horse just got brought to you like last week. We don't even know what this horse's training is. But if you try this method that is in that classical canon, it helps the horse understand. It helps you communicate with the horse. It helps you convey your intention to the horse, and there is a back and forth. Then it's worth keeping. And there's no way that we can be so egotistical ourselves in our own life to say, okay, well, I'm, 80 years, or, God willing, in my vast experience, my vast experience, or your vast experience in your lifetime, cannot compete with the thousands and thousands of horsemen and horsewomen and horses over the thousands of years that has aggregated this trial and error experience and knowledge to distill, hey, we tried a bunch of stuff. This is actually what works. So, so I don't think of myself really as, oh, Richard, you're a dressage instructor. Not really. I really am trying to teach horsemanship that works. Horsemanship that actually works because it actually is effective with most horses, with most riders, most of the time. A methodology, and I'm always trying to add to that, refine that, sometimes even dispense, maybe say, hey, I've decided something that I did 10 years ago, I'm now revising because I found in this situation I could do something different. So I teach people in Western saddles. I teach people, in Doma Vaquera saddles, in English saddles. I teach quote unquote Western dressage. I even had a barn that I went to where all the people were Western. It was a Western barn. And they said, can you teach us to do, quote unquote side pass? And I'm like, yes, among other things. The only thing I require is I do need you to have a bit that has a joint in it, a little snaffle bit. Like, that's really the only thing that because I can't really be doing this with a rigid bit. But you can ride whatever saddle makes you feel comfortable, or what you're going to use when I'm gone. I mean, the majority of people that I teach are in English saddles, but I don't think of myself as classical as being dressage. I think of classical as being, this is the methodology that has been handed down to us through trial and error,
Right.
experimentation.
But there is something beautiful about it. What is beautiful about it? Why is this way of riding, like, it's aesthetically beautiful, right? It looks beautiful. Why does it look beautiful? How does it feel? Talk to us about that. Where does the
Well,
beauty come from? And why is
well,
that important?
the beauty is because it is the classical way is like having the correct key in the door and turning the latch that allows us to enter into the horse's being.
Mm-hmm.
It allows us to enter instead of riding at the horse
Mm-hmm.
or on the horse or to the horse, we are riding with the horse.
Mm-hmm.
If we're really doing correct riding,
Yes, like you become the centaur. You are, if you like,
you
in the horse.
the horse actually stops seeing you as a threat on his back and actually enjoys having you on his back and wants to carry you around. And the and that chi, the chi power that you get from riding horses is like a life force. For me, it's like a life force. Like, I just saw something, where they were showing all of the original actors of Star Trek, and Scotty and Leonard Nimoy, and we're in the year right now 2026, and and the last one they show is William Shatner,
Mm-hmm.
and and I said, and then all these people had died in their 60s and 70s, and some very early, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
and I said to Francis, my better half, I said, do you realize how old William Shatner is? And he's still alive. He's 96 or 94.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, well, you know why he is still alive. And I said, well, luck? No. And she said, no, he continues to ride horses. He continues to, yeah. And it's a life force.
Yeah.
This interchange of energy between the rider and the horse keeps us youthful.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a physician, and and has seen many, many lives and run a nursing home. And I really believe that. It's like, for riders, her saying is once you stop riding, it's kind of over.
Mm-hmm.
So, I hope you and I and all of our people that are listening to this get to keep riding in some fashion, into our 8th or 9th decade.
Well, what's interesting is when my son, the story, but when my son became verbal, he was autistic and nonverbal in the saddle in front of me. And I found that when I rode a horse in a way that was towards that classical way, I didn't know so much about it at the time. When I started riding in this collected way with my son, which originally I was doing just for safety, to make it more balanced, I didn't really know the system behind it at that point. It felt very, very beautiful. Like it felt beautiful. And we all go and look at those pictures from the Baroque era and the classical era of Greece and Rome and whatever, and we see horses in this very round shape. And this very round shape with elevated movement looks aesthetically beautiful. That's why they made paintings of it and did sculptures of it. And that same feeling of beauty, of course, translates through your body when you're on the horse. My son became verbal, and then neuroscientists explained to me later, oh, yeah, the reason that feels beautiful, Rupert, is because it is actually making you produce a hormone. It's rocking your hips in this rhythmic way, not unlike making love, not unlike dancing. And when you do those things, you produce the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin is the best physical feeling of all of the happy hormones. You got your dopamine, you got your endorphins, you got your serotonin, and you got your oxytocin. And oxytocin is the one that gives you the really ecstatic feel, and it's there to make you communicate. It's a hormone of communication. So, of course, you also communicate cross species with this other animal and across the predator prey barrier, which is almost miraculous. And then, of course, there's the aesthetic side. Now, I didn't know all that before I started doing it, but once the neuroscientists explained to me, I was like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense then why people would have pursued this as an art for hundreds of years, thousands of years, because not only is it really functional, you can stop, start, spin, catch a cow, fight a bull, fight another man on horseback, but you can also heal yourself of mental illness because it feels so good and it makes you communicate within your species, cross species, with nature in general. You're open for communication because of the oxytocin. And the sciences, arts and sciences, of course, are completely connected to the classical riding thing. We talked about Xenophon having been a philosopher, having been a military tactician. And philosophy, of course, back in the ancient Greek era, was not limited to sitting around talking about stuff. It meant science as well. It meant anything that was inquiry. So all these guys were playing with the sciences. And then I've noticed in a lot of the books that you've published, from the 17th century is a good example. From the 18th century is a good example. Eisenberg from the 18th century is a good example. A lot of these people are talking about the link between classical riding, effectively three-dimensional riding, not just going from point A to point B, but going to side, going up in the air, going down to the ground, going backwards, spinning, being able to do this in a soft, non-resistant way, there being a real correlation between people that do this and people that do arts and sciences, and that you need academies that teach all of this stuff. Can you go into a little bit of this history? And you publish all these people. Why were they saying this? Why were they noticing this link between this type of riding and training of a horse and this type of mind that could then go into the sciences and the arts and further on from there? Talk to us about this link.
I'm looking to see if I have a copy of that book, if you don't mind.
Which one? Pluvinel or?
No, the one that I'm looking for is the one by Tomasini.
Oh, yes. While you're looking for it, I'm going to tell the viewers and readers what that is. So there's a really good book that's by the Xenophon Press by an Italian author and academic called Tomasini. And I think you need to find his Age of Chivalry website. He really goes into this. He wrote a very good book recently about the early Renaissance Italian masters and how they founded academies based upon the idea of Socrates, Xenophon, and Plato, but a couple of thousand years later, where you could come to learn, usually in Naples, but then they grew out from Naples, the arts of horsemanship, riding, but also fencing, mathematics, languages, astronomy, you name it. And the reason was that rather than just teaching people how to be warriors on horseback, they were now teaching people to be diplomats, so that you would go into a foreign court and be able to hold your own in the saddle, in conversation, in science, etc., etc., and you would be perceived as a man of who's cultivated and civilized and three-dimensional, what we now call a Renaissance man. But it starts, of course, in the actual Renaissance, and horsemanship's at the key with this. I've given a bit of preamble to Tomasini. Take us in.
So this is the book. Is that visible?
It blurs and then it comes out, but we'll put a link at the end. Just read us the title.
So the name of the book is called The Italian Tradition of Equestrian Art.
The Italian Tradition of Equestrian Art.
And it's by Giovanni Battista Tomasini. And the subtitle is A Survey of the Treatises on Horsemanship from the Renaissance in the Centuries Following. And I think it's about 10 years ago. It was about 2016 that we published this. And GB is what I call him. That's what a lot of people call him, short for Giovanni Battista. So GB actually has his own press now, and he publishes works in Italian. Some of the authors that we have published in English For example, GB Tomasini in Italy, they are publishing works in Italian. And another notable example is Werner Poschernig in Austria. We published The Austrian Art of Writing in English, and he has since opened his own press and publishes, Austrian works in German. And I'm just kind of proud of that because I think they sort of saw what I was doing in English, and I'm really happy that they're publishing those works in their local countries, and bringing back a lot of these works. And we have very, very friendly relationship with these authors who are now publishers. And I'll tell you another story about them. But, but what was going on in the Renaissance, as you know, Italy was just a series of little city states. There was little fiefdoms. That's probably an English word, but they're little principalities. So you would have there. It wasn't a nation. It was an area that was separated off from a lot of the rest of Europe by its geography being a long peninsula. But these
And
land
it had the legacy of the Roman Empire and the papacy, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So they had these land areas, and they would have a certain area that, let's say, a duke or a baron or whatever would be in charge of protecting the local people. And it was, of course, the feudal system. So there were serfs in the field working the fields, and it was a hierarchical system. But at the head of that was usually a family. One that comes to mind is the Medicis, right? So all of these Medicis, and it was a patriarchal system, pretty much. So the Medici senior would have offspring, and then these offspring would sooner or later become teenagers. So the little tiny baby that was cute, the new male heir to the family fortune or to the
Grows into a psychopath like Cesare Borgia.
Yeah, because as soon as he goes into puberty at the age of 12, 13, 14, 15, suddenly his parents become stupid and he's rebelling against them. He doesn't listen to them, and they just
declares war on his local neighbor.
Right. Yeah. So what they learned is like, oh, we'll send him off to a kind of boarding school. The name of these schools back then was called the School of Horsemanship. So, but horsemanship was not the only thing taught there. So what was the goal? It was like usually a 4-year process on average between the age of 14 and 18 or 16 and 20. And sometimes the curriculum lasted longer than 4 years. Sometimes it was 6 years. Sometimes it took longer if somebody was stubborn. But many things were taught in the School of Horsemanship, and including but not limited to, fencing, public speaking, mathematics,
sciences,
dancing,
swordsmanship,
and horsemanship. Why was horsemanship so important? Because that was transportation. There were no cars. The transportation was the horse. And if you were going to be a leader, you needed to be moving out front to direct either surveys of the land or patrols, or what you tried to do is avoid war. But if you had to go to war, you had to show yourself as a leader. And so you had to know how to ride a horse. And once the offspring graduated from this School of Horsemanship through this wide curriculum that included these life skills, then they could go back to their village or their principality and be, next in line for the throne or next in line as a leader. So you start out as a snot-nosed teenager lipping off your parents. And here's the great equalizer. When a lot of the horses that were used in these schools, the stallions, the males and the female horses were kept separate. So the tradition was that female horses were used at breeding farms, and they were also used often in carriages. So for carriage riding, basically because of the mare's structure of having
Longer back.
longer back, and having the abdomen be able to be opening, and having the pelvis invert a little bit to be able to birth foals. And the stallion has a more tucked pelvis in general from breeding and from, fighting with other stallions naturally. So the stallions were the horse of choice, and castration wasn't really widely done. And in some countries, like on the Iberian Peninsula, male horses are often just left as stallions as a normal course of protocol. But what would happen is these teenage boys who had been lipping off their parents and telling them that they didn't know what they were talking about, they would go to these schools, and then the riding teacher would basically say, okay, you're lipping everybody off. Just go ahead and ride this stallion and try that with the stallion, with the 1,200-pound stallion. And pretty soon the stallion gave feedback as to what kind of behavior was going to be acceptable and what was going to be thrown off. So if, I have this story of when we got our very, very first horse, I was 11 and my brother was 13 and my sister was 8. And I may have told this story before, but my brother was right at that age of 13. So he had been watching shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza, right, on TV, black and white versions. So my parents didn't know what to do. We got this little pony, and my brother got on the little pony, and it was a mare, and it was probably 14 hands. And he got on, and they looked at the three of us, and they said, okay, this is actually for Kathy, my little sister, who is 8, but we're not going to sacrifice Kathy first. Let's put Mark on. So they put my brother on, and my brother, who had not ridden horses before, and his only example was Gunsmoke and Bonanza, the TV shows. He just remembered a guy getting on and kicking the horse with both legs and then taking off, after he fell out of the second floor, the John Wayne movie, falling out of the second floor balcony of the saloon and then taking off. So he got on and he just kicked the horse while she took off with him and galloped out of sight behind the L-shaped barn, galloped, the very fast movement of feet. And then he completely disappeared, and she promptly galloped straight towards the muck heap, which was a giant pile of straw and horse shit that was being pushed into a wet area on the farm, and then did a sudden lurching stop, very much like the Thelwell cartoons. And he went ass over tea kettles and was thrown off. She didn't even buck. She just went from a gallop to a sudden stop, and he landed directly in the manure pile. And so we didn't even keep up with this because it was around the corner, and the mare came trotting back with the reins drooped down, very proud of herself. And we were thinking, where's Mark? And he came around the corner, and I heard many, many swear words that I had never heard up until that point. I didn't even know they existed, but it was a new list of vocabulary. But this is an example of how a horse will tell you that what you're doing is unacceptable. And so the horse being 1,200 pounds and us not being 1,200 pounds, the horse guides us. It has this civilizing effect on people because it sorts for the right kind of behavior. So if a rider is going to learn from the horse, the rider starts to refine their aids and starts to eliminate the abusive, coarse, rough aids because a lot of horses just won't tolerate that. And then we can take that to the nth degree when it goes towards art, where we start culturing the rider's tact or the tactfulness of the rider, where we see riders, and we've seen in the 18th century, like in Eisenberg or in Regenthal or in Sind, where the big boast, the big bragging about what makes a great horse person is that we basically cannot see the aids. The rider sits there. It
It
looks like
seems to
it's
happen just by, like Jimi Hendrix playing the guitar. It just seems that
right,
the
right.
guitar plays itself. Yeah, yeah.
Playing the guitar without moving your fingers.
Yeah.
And so people realize that that is mastery.
As you know, if you followed any of my work, I'm an autism dad, and we have a whole career before this podcast in helping people with neurodivergence, either who are professionals in the field. Are you a therapist? Are you a caregiver? Are you a parent? Or are you somebody with neurodivergence? When my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism in 2004, I really didn't know what to do. So I reached out for mentorship, and I found it through an amazing adult autistic woman who's very famous, Dr. Temple Grandin. And she told me what to do. And it's been working so amazingly for the last 20 years that not only is my son basically independent, but we've helped countless thousands of others reach the same goal, working in schools, working at home, working in therapy settings. If you would like to learn this cutting-edge neuroscience-backed approach, it's called movement method. You can learn it online. You can learn it very, very simply. It's almost laughably simple. The important thing is to begin. Let yourself be mentored, as I was, by Dr. Grandin, and see what results can follow. Go to this website, newtrailslearning.com. Sign up as a gold member. Take the online movement method course. It's in 40 countries. Let us know how it goes for you. We really want to know. We really want to help people like me, people like you out there live their best life, to live free, ride free, see what happens.
That is because the horse has now welcomed you, because you deserve to be welcomed, because you acted, in a way that respects the horse's nature and sees him as a partner and not as a vehicle. Yeah. So did I answer your question?
You did. And I think what it's coming down to is preparing the person that goes through that academy to be a diplomat and an ambassador. It's interesting. Leonardo da Vinci said, a man in public life must learn to ride beautifully, because he will be seen on horseback everywhere he goes. If he looks like a dick, and he's bouncing about up there like a sack of potatoes, he'll be laughed at. And clearly he won't have mastery, and he could be unseated easily and fall in the mud if you chuck something at his horse. If you spook his horse, down goes the king. And but also it will humble the young prince so that he doesn't get too above himself. And I've actually had personal experience of this when I was a boy growing up as a young teenager in Leicestershire in the UK, which is a big fox hunting area, lots of big jumping. And Prince Charles, who's now King Charles, used to come and hunt with us. And you would see him, face down in a ditch, the same way you see anyone else face down in a ditch, because that's just the laws of physics. And the laws of physics don't care if you have a title that other monkeys thought up for you. The laws of physics are the laws of physics. And he wouldn't stand upon his dignity or his honor if he was chucked off the horse and then ordered the horse's head to be cut off or anything. He'd get up, laugh, brush himself down, say, well, we're only human. If you could, get back up and go on. And so I think with the tradition of horsemanship and people in power, there has been this really interesting interplay through the classical ages of it's both an exercise in humility and it's an exercise in mastery. And of course, there is no mastery without humility. What everyone who comes into contact with a horse and tries particularly to ride in 3 dimensions, I think, encounters is that the horse does not care what's in your bank account. You had better humble yourself to the system that is necessary, because this animal thinks for itself and has its own reactions, its own opinions, its own sense of humor. You, by the way, are the butt of the joke, because who else is there to be the butt of the joke? And how you deal with that is going to be, to some degree, how you deal with your commonwealth. If you are forcing and terrorizing your horse, you're probably going to be a tyrant to your people. You know, we can actually see this, I think, in generally in how people behave with animals is often how they'll behave with humans. So you then published, of course, a book which was written in the early 1600s by a man called Antoine de Pluvinel, who had been one of the Northern European, in this case French, students at one of these academies, because, of course, the sons of the nobility of Northern Europe also sent their scions, or sorry, were also sent down to these academies to learn all these arts and come back and become sort of polished courtiers back home. And Bell came back to the King of France, where he was then hired to train the king's horses. He said, listen, sire, we need actually 4 of these academies, which we have down in Italy. France is a square. Let's have one sort of at each point of the square on the inside, because our young nobility are out of control. They are, if they're not dueling with each other, and of course when they kill each other in duels, this breaks up estates, it shatters the local economy. And then when they get older, if they survive, they just simply declare war on each other, or worse, war on the crown. We've had 100 years of, chaotic civil war. Spain is to the south of us and it's dominating the world right now. We have a much richer agricultural base and trade base than Spain does, apart from the Americas. We could supersede Spain in Europe as the dominant power, as long as those pesky Englanders don't get there first. But we'll never do it unless we get control of our young aristocracy, because right now they're just messing everything up. What he said is Xenophon, these guys from Xenophon the Greek, these guys from these Renaissance academies down in Italy are making a good point. If you're going to train a horse and learn to ride a horse 3-dimensionally like this with these invisible aids and contain and manage all this power gracefully, then you have to do one thing. You have to be able to get control of your emotions. Emotional regulation. We talked about oxytocin, emotional regulation, being able to handle your shit. If you can do this, you can probably kind of get by in life, but if you can't, maybe not. And he said, this is what our aristocracy needs. They need to learn how to handle their emotions, their hotheads. And the king went for it because of that book that you now still publish. And that's why we, of course, ended up with all those French words, because they nationalized it. That's why we have dressage, passage, piaffe, renvers, travers, all these words. So I think it's been really borne out that to learn to ride a horse in this complex way requires you to get control of your own complexities. How do you feel that your publishing of this canon of people doing this over the last few hundred years could kind of help us today? Because I think it's fair to say we're living in uncertain times again. And a lot of the stability that we have taken for granted in the last 90 years, 80 years, is beginning to fray and fragment. What can your books, what can this kind of classical horsemanship teach us and help us with now in this modern era?
So the reason I'm going to answer that, but the reason, so why was horsemanship effective at getting those French youths or the Italian youths or the Europeans able, why and how? What is the nature of horsemanship? This is the question. That how is it that taught those people to do emotional regulation?
Mm.
So I know the answer to that, because when we are emotionally dysregulated in our minds, we are often worrying or fretting about the things that might happen in the future.
Mm-hmm.
We're also regretting or having guilt about the things that did or didn't have in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And what the horse does for you to succeed, and let's just say even survive on horseback today, or whether it's in 1562 or in 1658 or tomorrow, what good horsemanship, classical horsemanship, and this is not really maybe underlined in these classical texts. It's probably assumed for you to succeed, the horse lives in the present. The horse lives in this moment and the next second. But the horse isn't isn't living a life of regret. And the horse is not really worrying about what might happen tomorrow. The horse is just dealing with what is happening now. And if you want to be a good horseman, or a good horse woman, or a good horse person, then you need to become more like the horse. You need to ride empathizing, understanding how the horse perceives the world.
It's mindfulness. You have to be present with the horse.
And you can't, your mind cannot be racing forward into the future. And it can't be living a life of, oh my God, when I was 13, that Appaloosa took off with me through the barbed wire fence, and that's going to happen, in the next 5 minutes. Well, you're not riding an Appaloosa. There's no barbed wire fence. You're riding a draft horse now. So things are quite different. So this idea of worry, of fretting about the past, worrying about the future, does not serve you, because while your mind is preoccupied with those frets and worries and the emotions that go along with them, these thoughts that are, just because your thought is happening doesn't mean it's real.
Absolutely.
It does not mean it's real.
I have noticed this about my thoughts. They're often wrong,
What is actually real is what is actually occurring right now. That is what we're doing. And that is actually where we belong. So this is why horsemanship worked more than the lecture on physics, or more than the lecture on here's how you give a public address, and really, to be a good dancer, with a partner, you need to be right in that moment and planning maybe 4 or 3 seconds ahead of where you are now.
It is a dance. It is a dance when you're with a horse.
Yeah. So this is why and how it was a sorting process and effective. Now, I don't think, I'm looking for the place in these texts where they really tell about this idea of like bringing yourself back to the now. And there's 2 words that we have the benefit of that do this for us. And this is what I try to imbue all of my teaching with, what I try to do as basically the first step. And one is breathing. That, and it's not really, I'm looking for it in De la Guerinière, but I don't necessarily see it. that may have been like common sense or just assumed that people are going to continue to breathe. But this breathing of bringing yourself into the now, of what is actually going on right now, what are not what you're worried about, or not what he did 5 minutes ago, or what he didn't do 5 minutes ago. And the other huge important thing is that you need to trust your feel. You need to develop feel in these parts of your body, your inner thighs, your inner calves, your backside. There's not really, in these disparate parts of our body, like the way we go through life, we do a lot of this feel by our hands and by our eyes, right? And our sense of balance. But it trains us to create neural pathways to other parts of our body, like basically the parts of our body that may be ignored. And I think this is actually the mechanism by which it calms. This is necessary to be a good rider. This is what is kind of therapeutic for me as a rider. I mean, I have, this person that wants a check. Did I remember to fill out that form? Have I returned this library book? Has my computer updated? Did I call the plumber? Did I remember to go get the dishwasher, the replacement dishwasher, all of this stuff? And that I can't remember whether I've done, or all this worrying, right? When I go through the gate to our barn, I have a commitment to myself and Francis, and we have a commitment to each other that we're just going to focus on the horses, where we can't be talking about other stuff because it's actually unsafe. It's completely unsafe to be
Yeah, it's
distracted.
like if you're operating dangerous machinery, you've got to be there.
Completely and utterly focused. So this skill of focusing on what is just the next right thing to do, the next one right thing to do. This is a skill that is, first of all, it's calming because you're only having one thing to do. And people who think that riding is multitasking, I really think are wrong. I think that what you need to do is hold yourself in balance and then only feel what is going on right now and what is the next one thing that I could do to improve the status quo. And then look at, okay, I'm going to do this one thing that I guess or remember this is the right thing to do. And now we have a new 2 seconds later, we have a new status quo and we have a new moment. And in that moment, we can ask the same question. Do I need to make any changes here? What do I feel? So this idea of feeling and going from moment to moment and then asking ourselves, this is a kind of physical meditation. And what the horse is, to me, is the horse is this three-dimensional mirror. It's just reflecting back you, and it's reflecting back your interface, your physical and spiritual interface with this living being that is kind of adjudicating. It's kind of judging you. It might be ignoring you. It might be resisting you, and it might be responding to you. And it might be responding to you in ways that are challenging. And there's also responses where the horse is yielding and saying, yes, I will. These experiences are what happens in life, right? When you go to the villagers and say, well, we really need to make this fence around here so the sheep don't get out, right? We really need to do that because the sheep are wandering. And then you have a villager who doesn't want to make the fence or is going to resist you. And so these skills of like, well, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? You have to keep regrouping and reinforcing. You have to repeat. But on the other hand, the other villager who makes the sheep fence, you say, good job, fantastic job. I have more responsibility for you. I'm going to reward you for keeping the flock together. So these skills that you learn on horsemanship, they're still they're still valid today because they teach us, the horse teaches us this feedback system. If you're willing to pay attention, these same things are going on in life. This is why
Yeah.
therapeutic horseback riding is not a gimmick,
Yeah.
because the horse is always giving you this honest feedback. And it's either, following you, following your lead because you proved yourself as a reliable and
Mm-hmm.
believable leader, or the horse is ignoring you
Mm-hmm.
because you were not compelling, or the horse is opposing you.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, or the fourth thing is you and the horse have harmonized and seem to be doing the same thing. These are basically the four conditions of horseback riding, but these, in a way, you could argue, are the four conditions of life.
I agree. It's interesting. Two things came up for me while you were talking, of course. One is that, in these previous centuries, this type of fine riding was seen as a way to train people who are going to have to be leaders to lead well, because it's not just about finding and maintaining balance. Of course, what we know is that it's about what you do with the loss of balance, the process that you were just describing. With one villager opposes you, one villager goes with you, one villager is neutral, but this can shift moment to moment. The horse's reactions to you shift moment to moment. You have this great moment, and then you have a terrible moment. Then maybe you retrieve that, and you have a great moment again. And if this is in war or out hunting, this could be life or death for you. If it's in the manege, in the arena, that's perhaps where you're refining the skill so that when you go out into those other situations, when balance is lost, you can retrieve quicker. And then I thought, okay, and that's sort of the old patriarchal world, which was largely run by particular types of psychopath. And, great, great genocides have been committed on the backs of horses, as we know, by very skilled riders, but also very humane riders have opposed that process of genocide and inhumanity. And it seems that the people who really dedicated themselves to the write the kind of books that you now publish were generally, in the early centuries, men of great humanity and compassion and kindness. And they were the underlying message they're saying is, be kind and compassionate to your horse, and be kind and compassionate to your fellow man. Then, of course, you hit the early 1900s, and we have suffrage, and suddenly we have a massive influx of women into the upper echelons of riding, who prove that it's not a male dominated thing at all, and it seems to serve as a bit of a springboard for the feminist movement, in that an awful lot of those economically powerful women who got behind the suffrage movement in the early 20th century were horsewomen, and were horsewomen who tried to ride and deal with their horses in this way. And now we're at this next juncture where we're rethinking our relationship with horses at all. And we're realizing that, back to that oxytocin thing we were talking about earlier, and this emotional intelligence thing that we've been talking about subsequently, that the same system that was perhaps created for us to sit on a horse to harm our fellow man in the most efficient way possible by being in three dimensions of movement, could, like martial arts, could also be used to heal our fellow man. And we've seen, I think, in recent years, a growing dysfunction with sport riding, particularly sport dressage, where it seems to be harming horses and people again. And now I feel that the bubble is beginning to burst, and that what we've learned through therapeutic riding, as you just said, is now perhaps going to spill out into taking us into a new form of what the next form of, if you like, classical riding is. We've talked about the good effect of this type of horsemanship, and this is the books that you publish on the human. What about on the horse? What does this classical thing do for the animal that is giving itself to us so generously and so?
Well, right. So the horse is probably I read this recently. The horse is the biggest single other living entity that has contributed to the civilization of man and to our progress, because and this went on for centuries. They allowed us to be mobile.
Mm-hmm.
They allowed us to save our backs. They allowed us to move around. They allowed us to lead. They allowed us to borrow their legs and go really fast and get around and survey lands and all the things that horses do. So because it wasn't dogs,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't oxen, and it wasn't giraffes, and you can't have elephants go everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So,
as you may know, if you've been following my work, we are also horsey folk here, and we have been training horses for many, many years in the manner of the old classical dressage masters. This is something which is often very confusing for people. We shine a light on that murky, difficult stuff and make it crystal clear. If you'd like to learn to train your horse in the manner of the old masters and really have fun and joy for you and your equine, go to our website, heliosharmony.com, sign up as a premium member and begin to take the Helios Harmony course, which will take you from zero to the piaffe, where the horse is dancing on the spot, in hand, on the ground. And then from there, you can develop out to anywhere you want to. heliosharmony.com to unlock the secrets of the old masters.
so the horse, more than any other living creature, has had that. So we have a lot of experience over, millennia working with horses. As you know, the riders from the steppes and earlier people, the North Americans were on the plains and had already, been riding horses around, herding buffalo and hunting, et cetera, et cetera. So they're in disconnected cultures, geographically disconnected, humans were coming to the same conclusion. So, and the bonds that people had with horses were extremely rewarding, and people were very beholden to the horse. So I think for these reasons that where we know have historically benefited us, it's not necessary. It's not necessary for the same reasons that it was in the past, because now we have, Teslas, right? So we have a Tesla, or we have a Volkswagen Jetta, or we have a moped. So we're not necessarily using them for transportation, but the horse is not obsolete because it still has these character building qualities. And we know from experience that delving into waywardness, let's just call it waywardness, that has been in the human condition as long as we have had humans, waywardness of people losing the path, losing the way through debauchery or indulgences. This has always been, we hear about the opium dens, and we hear about, crime. These are people who are not availed of the benefits of horsemanship. So horsemanship does have this ability to heal. If you're an executive and you have a high stress job, then going to the barn and spending time with your horse is super rewarding. It can be, and very, very therapeutic. And therapeutic in an interactive way, that's not the same as going to see a therapist, going to see and talking about your problems, but actually it is a physical asana. It's a physical meditation. It's a experience. You're moving through when you are going to see your therapist and you lay on the sofa or you sit in the chair. That's talk therapy, which is legitimate. But the the physical the physical meditation, and it's it's all of the things. It's your action, it's your motion, it's your touch. It can be also your speech. The validity of that is really what needs to be put forward, because I think, okay, the window might be why why is therapeutic riding like a thing? Because maybe it was discovered and people realized, okay, well, all this talk therapy is not really helping these people, but we do this physical asana, we do this kind of physical kind of meditation and experience. And then, like with your son and others, it awakens something. Well, that is just as therapeutic for for an everyday person. But why did you seek this? Well, you didn't necessarily even seek it. You stumbled upon it, right? You were doubling your son in front of you and you're like, wait, I'm noticing he's actually talking now. So you, you, I don't know exactly what your experience is, but so you were really, really looking for a solution. So you were open to like anything, what about a sailing trip? What about riding horses? It
Sure.
could have a camping trip.
Just because I like riding horses doesn't mean I was in any way attached to this thing happening on the back of a horse. Absolutely.
Right. So, but one could, not to put words in your mouth, but you might have been somewhat desperate, right? Like
I was more
at
than
your
somewhat
wit's end.
desperate. Yeah.
You're at your wit's end. I'm like, I will actually try anything.
Yeah.
So it is a healing. Horses have a healing quality to them. I mean, I have people that come to my barn and they're not real. They've had, touch and go experiences with horses, and they come and they just say, "Can I just come and groom your horses for you?" And they're like, they're I watch I give them the safety, don't go behind the horse. This is how we tie them. We close the stall door. This is how you pick up their feet. And then I basically leave them on their own. This is how you brush, you know, directionally with the the direction of the hair. And I look on them and I don't hover. And I just watch the effect that this has on people, and it's completely regenerative. Not even riding, just being around the horse.
Absolutely.
So through observation, I just know, yeah, that's really valuable. And they are a species on this planet, and when we ignored or we exploited other species, they became extinct when we didn't take care of them. So there's a huge value. It's not just like, yeah, it's nice to have some horses running around. I mean, humans will always, want to say, the human nature is always going to say, well, what's in it for me? What's in it for the human? How is this going to make our life better? And so I think that's really what is incumbent upon moving from this point forward. What is the future of horses? And I think to the work that you're doing with therapeutic riding, but it really, we could just expand that and just say, are you tired of scrolling on Facebook and looking at your screen time being 7, 8 hours a day times 365 days a year times the rest of your life? Is that really bringing you meaning in your life? Is it really helping you, or is it making you more anxious, or is it making you less physically active?
Mm.
And that in itself is an addiction. I mean, we also run, you have other enterprises that you run. One of the things that we run is an addiction practice.
Mm.
And both Francis and I are involved in that. And I would really like to start exploring the use of horses with addicts.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
that's a no-brainer, and I think that is perhaps the next place you and I should go together.
yeah, yeah,
Because with our programs, the Takin program in particular, which is classical horse training from the ground as its own therapy. And back to that program arrived out of necessity for us, also out of desperation, because once we were working in our therapeutic riding program with so many people starting to come in and having to produce horses that could go collectively and had enough well-being, were overflowing with well-being, physical and mental themselves. That's of course what the classical approach gives you, because it gives you a horse that's well muscled over the back, particularly where you're going to sit, that is supple. Basically, a horse that's effectively going through a constant yoga process for the body and the mind. That is really what classical horsemanship is. We ran out of time to because it's time consuming to do this for horses. And we began to panic a bit. Okay, what's going to happen? We can't let our horses go downhill. If they haven't got well-being, how can they give well-being? And then we're like, duh, our clients should be the horse trainers. They are
yeah,
perfectly capable of doing this. And then it became this four-way win-win-win-win thing, because the horse was getting what it needed. We were getting what we needed, which was lack of stress. The clients, the adult clients that were coming in, were getting empowerment through learning how to rehab and maintain these donated horses. And of course, the child that was going to then benefit from that same horse down the road was also getting that benefit. But it was the classical system that allowed it to happen. And
mm,
without your books, we wouldn't have been able to do it, because yes, we went and we studied with real classical masters like the great Luis Valença in Portugal, who was a product of the great Nuno Oliveira, who you published. But you can't be 24/7 with these people. And you
mm,
have to, as Nuno Oliveira himself said, don't let the classical riding books on your bookshelf gather dust.
mhm.
Constantly go to them and learn, and then try to apply it in practice. Without you producing this canon, it wouldn't happen. So, what I want to ask as we come towards the close, because we're at the 2.5 hour mark, and we can pick this conversation up again in a later podcast, and I think we should, is if you were going to get going, you're a newbie to this, and you want to explore like the 4 or 5 books through the centuries that are going to give you the best trajectory, the best overview for the human point of view and the horse point of view. What are those 4 or 5 books that you could say out of this entire canon, these are the guys you should start with?
Well, I would ask you the same thing.
Ooh. Does that mean I get to have a go?
Yeah, you get to have a go. I mean,
All right.
I'm interested in, you know, I always think it's more fun to answer a question with a question, you know.
Okay.
It's a
Well,
way of,
okay. All right. I'll have a crack. I'll have my crack at it and see
yeah.
see where we intersect. We'll make it like a Venn diagram. I reckon you have to start with Xenophon, because it's it's the genesis, and then what one realizes with Xenophon is, oh, he's actually writing almost 2,500 years after this thing has been invented. out there somewhere on the Western Russian Ukrainian steppe and has gone down through Mesopotamia. He just happens to be the first European who writes about it, but it's way older. And he tells us this. He tells us, I got this from the Persians, and the Persians got this from other people. And that puts it in perspective. And I think that's really useful in our post-colonial society as well, to say it's not a white person thing. It became adopted by white people, but it didn't start there. That's an interesting common humanity pulling together thing. Okay, so I think you've got to start with Xenophon and his basic principles. Then I think, for me, the next one is a big jump, and it's Tomasini's book, which you talked about the early Italian masters who were coming out of the Iberian tradition, and there's a historical reason why this Spanish Portuguese thing jumped across into Italy. I won't bore the readers with it now. We'll talk about it on another podcast, and how these academies began that reflected the old Greek academies, and this to some degree changed the political landscape of Europe. And then I think, for me, the next one is La Guérinière, writing in François Robichon de La Guérinière, writing in the early 18th century in France, because he is the one that I find is the clearest to follow. You can, if you have a basic understanding of the classical principles, you can use them like a textbook in your arena today, and it's going to work. He's thought it all through, and he presents it in non-esoteric language, and really does give you an overview to work from, which also shows you how it benefits your horse. After that, I think it's important to do a dual reading of both the German dude Steinbrecht and whatever you can read around the French dude Baucher, because they had to cope with different kinds of horses coming in and a change in horsemanship. And that created the schism that we have today between these two types of dressage, which have been forever at war with each other. It's good to understand why these people did what they did. But I think Baucher himself is hard to read. So I would favor that book, Racinet on Baucher, where he explains Baucher. And then Steinbrecht himself in Gymnasium des Pferdes, the gymnasium, the training of the horse, where he's pointing us towards how you got to kind of go with warm bloods a bit. And then I feel that after that, one has to look at Nuno Oliveira. But the problem with Nuno Oliveira, because he brings all these traditions together, is that his own stuff is really tricky to operate from. It's esoteric, it's not brilliantly clear, even though he was clearly a genius. So I, for my mind, have really benefited from reading the books that you published from his students, where they published their letters to and from Nuno, where he was advising them step by step on the training of their horses. People like, Michel Henriquet and those people. And you've got 3 or 4 books in these short volumes, which are these correspondences with Nuno. And I've learned a ton from those, a ton. Like I'd say I use the exercises. I don't think a day goes by where I don't use those exercises. And not a day goes by where I don't use La Guérinière as well. So for me, that would be my sort of go-to canon. And I've been a bit vague on those last books because it's about 4 or 5 of them. You would have the titles. But I know one was from Michel Henriquet, but there were a couple of others from his English-speaking students. But I have found Nuno's answers to their questions about how to train their horses up through the levels to be really, really, really useful to me. What do you think? What are your 4 or 5?
So those titles that you were mentioning were 30 Years with Nuno Oliveira, with Master Nuno Oliveira by Michel Henriquet, The Wisdom of Master Nuno Oliveira by Antoine Decoux, The Legacy of Master Nuno Oliveira by Stephanie Milham, and the 4th one is The Truth and the Teaching of Master Nuno Oliveira by Eleanor Russell. And
and I want to add one more.
Yeah.
I want to add Diogo Braganza.
Yeah.
Right. He's writing 20th and 21st century. He's coming out of that whole tradition. He's pulling it all together. Give me the name of his book.
Dressage in the French tradition.
Yeah, that book, I feel, I'm reading it currently, actually, really synthesizes the lot in
Yeah.
a way that is clear.
Well, what's great, we have a lot of the same books, and I don't disagree with any of the books that you said. Currently, we don't have our version of Xenophon, but it's a little bit ironic since that's the name of our press. So that's probably on my list to do. My wife is Greek, and she speaks Greek, so that's kind of a no-brainer that we should probably do our version of annotated Xenophon from the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll probably do that, in our spare time. So I don't disagree with any of these, and this is kind of a historical list. Your list is more than 5, which you're allowed to have a list of more than 5. I would say if I have to limit it to 5, I think there's value in bringing people through the centuries and not just saying, okay, you got to only read 18th century stuff. I don't think that's good. So what you're doing is you're pushing people from, 2000 plus years ago all the way up to, something written in the 20th century. I would say for me, the book that I kind of force everyone to buy is De la Guerinière.
Yeah.
I just
École de la Cavalerie. Yeah.
I just kind of, you need to have this because I'm going to say on, chapter 11, go read it, memorize it. It's going to be your next lesson in chapter 12. So, and chapter 20, and I often say to people, you do not have to read the whole book. Just read those chapters first and then go back and read. So I'm very directed in that because I want them to know what a shoulder end is. I want them to know what a croupe to the wall or renvers is. And I need them to know about how to ride the horse in open country. So, which is what that chapter 20 is about. And maybe we should do a little short, another long-winded podcast on just chapter 20.
Okay.
I would say I also agree the value of Dom Diogo de Braganza, that mine are not in a particular order because he brings it all together. He also says, well, what are the limitations of like how collected can you get a horse or how stretched can you get a horse? Is what happens when you take stretching to the ultimate degree, and is that a good thing? And what happens when you collect a horse to the ultimate degree? Is that a good thing? And have we gone too far? Or what are the limitations when we have impulsion taken to the ultimate degree? And then historically, he also, in not a very large book, he gives you this survey of like, this is how we got from long stirrups to short stirrups, and this is why. And in my riding, when I'm training horses and especially when I'm training horses, I tend to, with certain horses, experiment by pushing the envelope slightly. Like, what happens if we really get a whole bunch of impulsion? Or what happens if let's push the edge and see what the horse will show us? And then often I say, okay, well, now I'm a little bit out of balance or I'm out of rhythm, and now I know the edge that I can go to, right? That I can.
I know. Yeah, I know the borders. I know.
And
Yeah.
I've actually gone a slightly too far, and now I'm going to come back from that. So that aspect of that book, as well as the historical benefit of that, I think that the book that was thumped for me when I was growing up was Podolsky's Complete Training of Horse and Rider. And it's kind of a textbook. He was the director of the Spanish Riding School for 26 years. It's a 20th century thing. It's slightly Germanic, but it has a lot of good definitions in it. Like he defines what a trot is. He defines, what a shoulder in. It's more a manual on like how to. So,
Yeah.
in not with a ton of feeling. Okay, so I think that's a really good book for people who are really visual learners. Believe it or not, I actually recommend Sally Swift,
Okay.
Centered Writing, because it appeals to people who are kind of touchy-feely and want to create visual images. So people learn in different ways. It might not be the book for me per se, but
Mm-hmm.
it creates pictures for people. And for that reason alone, she's doing this graphic imagery. And that's often the key. That's the key that opens the door to understanding for some people. And then I think I actually like for to understand Boucher. And so the
Mm-hmm.
complete training of horse and rider would be the understanding of the German system. But for example, the carpentry does a good job of, in an unbiased way, of analyzing Boucher. So if you want to know about Boucher, his book called Boucher and His School, he
Mm-hmm.
writes a big essay about like who the heck was Boucher, and and who were his detractors, and
Mm-hmm.
even he talks about Louis Seeger, who was like, you know, vehemently against Boucher. But also he talks about, I think there's an appendix in there about Louis Rule, who was one of Boucher's students. And and so that's a very, very, I don't disagree with any of your lists. We probably have like 10 books here. So I think then anything around these. So for De La Grenier to read all, or to read Eisenberg, it's very interesting to see the similarities at within a 6-year time period
Mm-hmm.
about what is written around. So of course Steinbrecht is important, but for somebody who's a visual learner, they're not going to. Steinbrecht didn't make any diagrams in there,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
it is. So there are books that kind of explain Steinbrecht, for example, Gerd Heuschmann's, Bend and Positioning. That book kind of explains a section. So there are a lot of these treatises that explain other books, and that they can be of a big help. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to, well, for example, Boucher, you can actually skip reading Boucher because he wasn't a great writer and
Mm-hmm.
he's very, very confusing. So reading the treatises that explain Boucher is probably more valuable than trying to read Boucher and getting lost in the weeds. Steinbrecht, you can learn, but you need to read, you can read that, 1 or 2 or 3 pages a day.
Yeah.
So you've got about 100 days, of that rate, maybe 5 pages a day. So maybe it's less. So I think those books, and there's always new books. We talked about earlier, a while back, we talked about how people lived, ate, breathed horses. They're around horses all day. We have a book coming out this month called The Enlightened Horsemanship, 18th century, the Enlightened Horsemanship of 18th century Britain. So
Mm-hmm.
it talked, and they're talking about the long 18th century. So they're already talking about like late 1600s into the early 1800s. So they're kind of doing a 150-year span. But Alison Muller does a really good job of showing us how horses were for carriages, they were for racing, they were for farming, and then they were also for the manege, and how horses had completely saturated into life on the British Isles. There's no living without them. And
Mm-hmm.
and So that's these historical context books like Tomasini's, and this I think is really important to know what our history was, because there's, for example, she does a whole chapter on stable design and barns. And
Right,
she
the loose box comes out of the 18th century, absolutely.
right, but she has these like fascinate that our turnout, where you have a turnout shelter. All of our turnout shelters right now
Mm-hmm.
are rectangular or square.
Mm.
They have turnout shelters that are round. They're like a cylinder, and they're dotted all over England. Well, she found these things and went basically on an archaeological, expedition across Britain. And she's done incredible research on it. It's like, well, why don't we make round turnout
Mm.
shelters for horses? It would be better for the weather. They wouldn't get cast as
No one
easily.
can corner anyone. Yeah, yeah, it's true.
Right. Exactly. So, there's an endless list.
Mm.
It's a
Okay.
long-winded answer.
But what I think it comes down to for people who are listening or watching is go check out Xenophon Press. Go through the centuries. Don't worry that Xenophon Press don't actually publish Xenophon yet, because they will, and anyway, you can find Xenophon himself. But those others we talked about, Tomasini, La Guerinière, we'll list all these afterwards. Steinbeck and Bochet, the people that analyze Steinbeck and Bochet, Nuno, and the people that analyze Nuno, and then Diogo de Braganza. If you're into horses and you're into what horses can bring out of the human soul, as well as how this system of kind of yoga can really benefit a horse, and how the two can come together and create a sum that's greater than the parts, it's it's what you do, my friend. It's Xenophon Press. So listen, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I think we'll do it again. And for those who really want to kind of nerd out, Richard and I nerd out massively on YouTube about aspects of classical riding. And you might want to check out some of our videos there. We've got more coming up. And we also both are going to start teaching together, because I'm a bit of an in-hand, on the ground specialist, and Mr. Williams is a bit of a in the saddle specialist, and we can kind of do our little and large show together. And we're going to be doing that actually to raise money for two non-profits, the Horseboy Foundation, which of course deals with autism and other neuropsychiatric conditions and healing with horses. And Xenophon will have its own educational foundation as well, so that we can keep this library of Alexandria alive and not have it burned down like the other classical libraries. So watch this space, basically. If they want to contact you, give us the links, give us the plugs, Richard.
It's very simple. It's Xenophon Press at xenophonpress.com. And I'm happy I answer all emails. It's xenophonpress@gmail.com. And happy to answer any questions. We also have used books, out of print books. I have a book search service. So if you're looking for a book, I can try to find it, or we may have copies.
Perfect. So he's
Yeah.
also, if you want to get into the antiquarian side too.
Yeah.
He's
We
got
and we have williamsdressage.com, which is our riding site.
yeah. And I do suggest, Rich, again, those of you who are looking to experience this knowledge made practical, Richard has come and hung out here with me and my horses, and I've seen him ride, I've seen him train. It's very, very good. Go check him out, and his wife Frances, if you're looking in the USA for somebody cool to set you on the right track. They'll help you with that.
And you're coming to us, right, in June?
Yeah, that's right, I am. So we need to talk about that. Now, of
Yeah.
course, these things are evergreen, so we're in early January 2026 here, but hopefully someone's watching this 10 years from now. If they are, then we may be in your hood sooner, just looking a little bit grayer. So yeah, we'll be there and working together. So watch out for us, lads. All right.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Until the next one. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you did, please help us to make more. Please like, subscribe, tell a friend, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, please go to my website, rupertisaacson.com. And if you'd like to find out about our certification courses with autism, education, horsemanship, everyday shamanism, there's a whole range of cool stuff. Putting a show together like this is not an easy task. If you'd like to support us, please consider going to our Patreon page and showing us some love there. Even the smallest donation, it really helps us to keep the good content coming. So go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. Not to mention our excellent merch. Please go to our shop and check out some of our really cool rock and roll themed merch, t-shirts, hoodies, all that sort of thing. rupertisaacson.com. It's all there. I can't wait for our next guest and also to meet you there. In the meantime, remember, live free, ride free.